An infinite number of situations can test our values and sense of fairness. According to New York Times columnist David Brooks, Western civilization has an ancient recipe for being a better person, but have we forgotten it?
We're in a world full of good people, but who don't have a clear vocabulary for character. We don't have a moral system. Alistair McIntyre famously put it this way. He said, imagine you're in a world where you have words like neutron, gravity, neutrino, but you don't have a total system to understand how these things all fit together. Christian Smith is a sociologist at Notre Dame who went out and interviewed college students, and he said, name your most recent moral dilemma. And about 70% of the students he interviewed could not name a moral dilemma. They said, well, it's like you pull into a parking space and you don't have enough quarters. You want to rent an apartment, but you can't afford the rent. And he would say, well, that's a problem. It's not actually a moral dilemma. And so then he'd push them, and they'd fall back to emotivism, which is whatever feels right for me is moral for me, and if it feels right for you, then that's moral for you. And that's not actually a way to have moral arguments. And so it's not that they're bad people. They just have not been given a moral vocabulary to think about that. And I did a story for The Atlantic several years ago called The Organization Kid, where I interviewed college professors at Princeton and said, do you instill character in your students? And they said, well, we think they should develop it, but we really wouldn't know what to say. And I think that's true of how we raise our kids. I've written in the past about Uber moms who are highly successful career women who've taken time off to make sure all their kids can get into Harvard. And you can usually tell the Uber moms because they actually weigh less than their own children. So they're in the delivery room, they're at the moment of conception, they're doing little butt exercises to stay fit and trim, and then in the delivery room, they're cutting the umbilical cord themselves and flashing little Mandarin flashcards at the things to get into Harvard. And kids raised in this atmosphere are trained in everything, oboe practice, SAT practice, but in the most important thing, character, they're sort of on their own. And so what I'm going to try to describe over the next few minutes is a character code that stretches through history, and one we have forgotten. Now, being a University of Chicago grad, I'm going to start in Athens, around August 11th, 490 BC. The Persian army was invading Greece under Darius the Great, sweeping down, and the Persians were the great superpower of the day. They'd never lost, certainly had never lost to a little Greek city-state. And many of the Greek city-states submitted. There was no chance of beating those guys. The Athenians did not. And the Athenians took a series of audacious decisions. But the Athenians first decided not to submit, but to fight. That was their first audacious decision. The second was where to fight. Instead of staying behind their walls, the Athenians marched out 22 miles to Marathon and decided to fight them on an open field. The third audacious decision was how they would fight. The Athenians had a distinct fighting style. Well, there's some dispute among historians, but the general view is they fought as sort of a heavy armored human tank. What the Athenians did was they understood the strongest Persian troops were in the center, and they paradoxically weakened their force in the center. They said, we'll try to beat the weakest Persian troops on the wings, and then we'll envelop them. This was a radical revolutionary thing, but it must have seemed terrifying. So the question is, what motivated them to make all these audacious decisions? And what motivated the men themselves to carry them out? Well, they grew up with an ideology established by Homer. Homer was famously the education of Greece. People quoted him in a way that religious people quote the Bible today. And the code, the honor code, in part was based on the idea of how transitory life is and how fleeting, and how deeply insignificant an individual life can be. And so in Homeric morality, one of the things a great man wants to do is fight against that insignificance. And the way you do that is by achieving eternal fame and glory. You perform deeds of excellence in order to win the admiration of eternity. You behave courageously in a way that other people can see you do it, so they talk about you. You try to be like Achilles. So the Homeric man tries to risk his life to win honor. He asserts himself. He brags. He shows off. He makes sure everybody knows how great he is. Now, this Battle of Marathon is one of the most famous battles in human history, in part because, as people have famously said through history, without the Athenian victory in Marathon, there's no Plato, no Aristotle, no democracy. But to me, what interests me here is the heroic code that this very famous battle established through the centuries. And this heroic code based on courage, honor, eternal fame, and display. It inspired Alexander the Great, it inspired Machiavelli, it inspired Napoleon, it inspired Roman culture, obviously. It inspired the American founders, who were motivated by dreams, an aristocratic dream of honor and eternal fame. That is a code. And it's a code that has inspired excellence for years, for centuries.